Akeelah and the Bee, 2006, full details script. Hello and welcome back to Review and Facts, the channel where we take you deep into the stories, the people, and the history behind the movies you love. Today we are stepping away from the explosions and the capes and the monsters, and we are turning our attention to a film that quietly became one of the most beloved family dramas of the 2000s. We are talking about Akeelah and the Bee, a 2006 American film that proved you do not need superheroes to create a story that moves an entire audience to tears and applause. Grab a seat, settle in, and let us take you through everything there is to know about this remarkable little film that carried a very big heart. Overview. Akeelah and the Bee is a 2006 American drama film that was both written and directed by Doug Acheson. It was produced and distributed by Lionsgate, in partnership with several production companies including 2929 Entertainment, Starbucks Entertainment, Out of the Blue Entertainment, Reactor Films, and Cinema Gypsy Productions. The involvement of Starbucks as a producing entity was unusual for a Hollywood film, and it reflected the coffee company's early attempts at branching into cultural and entertainment projects that aligned with community-focused storytelling. The film is an American production through and through, filmed largely around Los Angeles, California, and it is set within the very neighborhoods it seeks to represent honestly and respectfully. The story of Akeelah and the Bee did not come together overnight. Doug Acheson spent close to 10 years developing the concept before it ever reached a movie screen. The idea was born after he watched the 1994 Scripps National Spelling Bee and noticed something that stayed with him. Nearly all of the competitors came from comfortable, well-off backgrounds, and there was a distinct lack of representation from children in lower-income or predominantly black communities. Acheson wanted to imagine what it would look like if a brilliant young girl from a struggling neighborhood in South Los Angeles had the same shot at greatness as anyone else. That question became the seed of the entire film. He completed the screenplay in 1999, and in 2000 he won a prestigious Nicholl Fellowship in Screenwriting for it, an award that is handed out by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to recognize outstanding new screenwriters. That recognition is what caught the attention of producers Sid Ganis and Nancy Holt Ganis, who helped guide the project toward production, alongside actor and producer Lawrence Fishburne, who would later also star in the film himself. Akeelah and the Bee first premiered at the Cleveland International Film Festival on March 16, 2006, before receiving its wide theatrical release across the United States on April 28, 2006. It carried a modest production budget, reported to be somewhere between $6 and $8 million, which is remarkably small by Hollywood standards. Despite that limited budget, the film managed to gross close to $19 million worldwide, a strong return that reflected just how warmly audiences embraced it. Running at 112 minutes and carrying a PG rating, the film was designed to be watched by families together, and it succeeded in delivering a message that resonated with children and parents alike. Plot details. At the center of the story is 11-year-old Akeelah Anderson, a bright and gifted girl living in South Los Angeles. Akeelah's home life is far from easy. Her father has passed away, her mother Tanya is overworked and emotionally distant as she tries to hold the family together, and her older brother has fallen into the orbit of local gang activity. Akeelah herself is a brilliant student, but she hides that brilliance behind a wall of quiet rebellion, skipping classes and avoiding attention because standing out as the smart kid in her neighborhood often comes with ridicule rather than admiration. Everything changes when Akeelah's school principal discovers her extraordinary vocabulary and her natural gift for spelling. Facing detention for her frequent absences, Akeelah is essentially pushed into entering her school's spelling bee as a way to avoid punishment. She wins with almost no effort, stunning both her classmates and herself in the process. That single moment sets her on an unexpected path, one that will eventually lead her from a small classroom competition all the way to the grand stage of the Scripps National Spelling Bee, the most prestigious spelling competition in the country. Akeelah does not walk this path alone. She is guided by Dr. Joshua Larrabee, a former English professor played with tremendous depth and restraint by Lawrence Fishburne. Dr. Larrabee is a mysterious and somewhat guarded man who initially seems reluctant to take Akeelah under his wing, but he gradually becomes her mentor, her disciplinarian, and eventually the closest thing she has to a steady guiding hand outside of her own family. Their relationship forms the emotional backbone of the film, built on rigorous drilling sessions, hard truths, and a slowly growing mutual respect. Dr. Larrabee pushes Akeelah not just to memorize words, but to understand their origins, their roots, and their meanings, teaching her that true mastery comes from understanding rather than memorization alone. As Akeelah advances through regional and district competitions, she begins to earn the support of her community in a way that transforms the neighborhood around her. Neighbors who once paid her little attention start rallying behind her, turning her journey into a shared source of pride. At the same time, Akeelah's mother Tanya, played by Angela Bassett, struggles internally with fear for her daughter's well-being and the pressure of watching her step into a world far removed from their daily reality. Tanya's own arc throughout the film is one of quiet transformation, as she slowly learns to embrace and support her daughter's talent rather than shield her from potential disappointment. Akeelah also forms important friendships and rivalries with her fellow spelling bee competitors, particularly Javier Mendez and Dylan Chiu, the latter a highly pressured competitor whose relationship with his demanding father reveals a darker side of academic competition. Through these relationships, Akeelah begins to understand that success is not only about winning, but about compassion, humility, and recognizing the humanity in the people she is competing against. The film builds toward the National Spelling Bee itself, held in Washington, D.C., where Akeelah must face not only some of the most gifted young spellers in the country but also her own fears about identity, belonging, and what it truly means to succeed. Without spoiling the emotional climax for those who have not seen it, the film's ending ties together every thread it has carefully built, delivering a conclusion that emphasizes community, self-belief, and the idea that true victory often comes in forms far more meaningful than a trophy. Cast: Keke Palmer stars as Akeelah Anderson, delivering a performance that many critics consider one of the finest child performances of that decade. Palmer was still a rising young actress at the time, and this role served as a major breakout moment in her career, showcasing a maturity and emotional range well beyond her years. Lawrence Fishburne plays Dr. Joshua Larrabee, bringing a commanding yet tender presence to the role of Akeelah's coach and mentor. Fishburne was also one of the producers behind the film, and his involvement helped secure both funding and industry attention for the project. Angela Bassett portrays Tanya Anderson, Akeelah's mother, grounding the film with a performance defined by exhaustion, love, and eventual growth. Bassett brings tremendous emotional weight to a character who must balance fear for her daughter with the pressure of holding her household together. Curtis Armstrong appears as Mr. Welch, Akeelah's school principal, whose decision to enter her into the spelling bee sets the entire story into motion. J.R. Villarreal plays Javier Mendez, one of Akeelah's fellow competitors and eventual friends, while Sean Michael Affable, Sahara Gary, Lee Thompson Young, Julito McCullum, Erica Hubbard, and Eddie Steeples round out the supporting cast as members of Akeelah's community and social circle. Ma plays Mr. Chiu, the strict father of rival competitor Dylan Chiu, whose storyline adds emotional complexity to the film's exploration of pressure and expectation in competitive academics. Release date and trailer information. Akeelah and the Bee premiered at the Cleveland International Film Festival on March 16, 2006, before opening in wide theatrical release across the United States on April 28, 2006, distributed by Lionsgate. The film's official trailer was released in the months leading up to its premiere, and it leaned heavily into the emotional core of the story, focusing on Akeelah's journey from an overlooked student to a nationally recognized competitor. The marketing for the film emphasized its inspirational tone and its family-friendly appeal, positioning it as a heartfelt underdog story in the same spirit as other beloved triumph over adversity films. Critics and audiences alike responded warmly to both the trailer and the finished film, praising its refusal to lean on tired stereotypes while still delivering a deeply emotional and satisfying arc. Akeelah and the Bee went on to receive recognition from several award bodies, including nominations and wins connected to the Black Reel Awards and the NAACP Image Awards, cementing its place as one of the most respected family dramas of its era. It remains a film that continues to be recommended in classrooms and households alike, valued for its message about perseverance, community, and the quiet power of believing in oneself. That brings us to the end of our deep dive into Akeelah and the Bee, a film that reminds us that greatness is not defined by circumstance, but by determination, discipline, and the people who choose to believe in us along the way. Akeelah and the Bee, 2006. The complete story retelling. Welcome back to Review and Facts. Today we are not just breaking down a movie, we are stepping fully inside it. We are going to walk through every chapter of Akeelah and the Bee from beginning to end, in full detail, so that by the time we are finished you will feel as though you lived through Akeelah's journey right alongside her. So settle in, because this is going to be a long and emotional ride, and it is worth every second. The Girl from Crenshaw. In the heart of South Los Angeles, in a modest house on a street lined with chain-link fences and tired front lawns, lived a girl named Akeelah Anderson. She was 11 years old, small for her age, with sharp, watchful eyes that seemed to be constantly reading the world around her, cataloging it, breaking it down into pieces the way she broke down words. Akeelah had a gift, though almost nobody around her had noticed it yet, and the ones who had noticed did not quite know what to do with it. She could spell. Not in the ordinary way that a good student spells, memorizing a weekly list and forgetting it by the following Monday, but in a way that felt almost supernatural, as if the architecture of language itself had been built specifically for her mind to wander through. Words did not intimidate her the way they intimidated other children her age. She collected them the way some kids collected trading cards, turning them over in her mind, testing their weight, noticing the small patterns hidden inside their letters long before anyone had ever taught her the rules that governed those patterns. It was a strange kind of loneliness, carrying a gift that nobody around you fully understands. Akeelah would sit on the porch steps in the evenings, notebook balanced on her knees, quietly writing out words she had overheard on television or read on the back of a cereal box, sounding them out under her breath, rearranging their letters just to see if she could still land on the correct spelling from memory days later. It was a private ritual, one she rarely shared with anyone, because in her neighborhood, being caught practicing spelling for fun was the kind of thing that invited exactly the sort of attention she spent most of her energy trying to avoid. At home, life was not easy. Akeelah's father had died some years before, a loss that had left a permanent quiet ache running through the household, one that nobody spoke about directly but that shaped everything. His absence was felt not in dramatic outbursts but in small silences, in the empty chair at dinner, in the way Tanya sometimes stared a little too long at old photographs before quickly busying herself with something else. Akeelah barely remembered the sound of his voice anymore, and that frightened her more than she ever admitted, the fear that grief eventually erodes even the memories you want most to keep. Her mother, Tanya, worked long hours as a nurse, coming home exhausted, stretched thin by the demands of raising 4 children largely on her own. Tanya loved her children fiercely, but love and exhaustion do not always look the same from the outside, and to Akeelah, her mother often seemed distracted, short-tempered, unable to see her the way she wanted to be seen. Tanya's days were consumed by hospital shifts, grocery budgets stretched to their breaking point, and a constant, low-grade worry about whether the family would make it through another month intact. She did not have the luxury of sitting down to ask her daughter what she was reading, or what new words she had discovered that week. Survival came first, and survival left very little room for anything else. Akeelah's older brother, Terrence, had drifted toward the pull of the streets, spending his evenings with young men from the neighborhood whose choices worried Tanya more than she ever admitted out loud. Terence had once been close with Akeelah, the kind of older brother who would walk her to school and tease her gently about her stack of library books. But somewhere along the way the streets had reached in and taken hold of him, pulling him further from the family with each passing month. Her older sister, Kiana, was pregnant and living a life that felt worlds away from schoolbooks and spelling lists, already carrying the weight of adult responsibilities that Akeelah could sense but not fully comprehend. And then there was her younger brother, Devin, still small enough to be shielded from most of the household's tension, a reminder of innocence in a home that had seen too much loss too early, the one member of the family whose laughter still came easily and often. Surrounded by all of this, Akeelah had built herself a kind of armor. She learned to keep her intelligence quiet, to let her grades slip just enough that she would not stand out, to answer teachers with the shortest possible response so that no one would ask her to elaborate. It was easier, she had decided, to be invisible than to be different, because different, in her experience, too often turned into a target. Akeelah moved through her days at Crenshaw Middle School like a ghost who did not want to be noticed. She was smart, remarkably so, but she had learned early that being smart in her neighborhood did not always earn you friends. It earned you suspicion. It earned you teasing. It earned you the kind of attention that made you want to shrink rather than shine. So Akeelah did what many gifted children do when their gifts feel like liabilities. She hid. She skipped classes. She let her attendance slide. She answered questions in class with shrugs instead of the full, articulate thoughts she was capable of. She wore her intelligence like a secret, folding it up small enough to keep in her back pocket, because a girl who stood out too much in her world risked standing out in ways that could hurt her. But secrets like that do not stay hidden forever, especially not from people who know how to look for them. A principal's gamble. Mr. Welch, the principal of Crenshaw Middle School, had been keeping an eye on Akeelah's file for a while, watching her grades slip alongside her attendance, watching a clearly capable student drift toward the edges of academic failure. He had seen this pattern before in other students, bright kids swallowed up by circumstances outside their control, and every time it happened it frustrated him in a way that went beyond simple administrative concern. He believed, perhaps more than most people at that school, that talent did not care about zip codes, and that somewhere buried beneath Akeelah's spotty attendance record was a student worth fighting for. When her truancy problem reached a point that could no longer be ignored, Mr. Welch called her into his office, not to punish her exactly, but to offer her an unusual bargain. He had noticed something in her placement test scores that most people would have missed entirely, an almost unnervingly high aptitude for vocabulary and spelling, scores that placed her far above grade level in ways that made him sit up and take a second look. He told her that the school needed a representative for the regional spelling bee, and that if she participated, he would find a way to overlook her absences. It was not framed as an opportunity so much as a trade, a way out of trouble rather than an invitation to greatness. And that framing mattered because it meant Akeelah walked into the classroom qualifying round seeing the whole thing as an obligation rather than a chance. Akeelah resisted. The idea of standing in front of her classmates and being paraded as the smart kid, the teacher's pet, the walking dictionary, made her stomach turn. She had spent so long trying not to be seen that the thought of being seen so completely, so publicly, felt unbearable. But detention loomed, and so did the disappointment of a mother who already had enough to worry about, so Akeelah reluctantly agreed to take part in the classroom qualifying rounds, telling herself she would do the bare minimum and slip quietly back into anonymity once it was over. That plan did not survive contact with her own talent. When the classroom spelling bee began, something shifted in Akeelah. The words came to her not as obstacles but as puzzles she had already half solved before they were even finished being read aloud. She spelled through her classmates' turns with an ease that startled everyone in the room, including herself. Word after word fell into place, her mind breaking each one down into its roots and patterns almost instinctively, as though she had been secretly training for this her entire life without ever realizing it. Classmates who had barely acknowledged her presence before suddenly turned in their seats to watch, whispering to one another, as she calmly spelled her way through words that tripped up nearly everyone else in the room. Within minutes she had won, and the astonishment on the faces around her, teachers and students alike, told her that whatever plan she had for keeping a low profile was now impossible. There was a strange, unfamiliar feeling that settled over Akeelah in the moments after her victory, something caught between pride and panic. Part of her had wanted exactly this, to finally let the thing she had hidden for so long see daylight, to feel, even briefly, the satisfaction of being recognized for something real. But another part of her, the part that had spent years building walls against exactly this kind of attention, immediately began looking for the exits, calculating how quickly she could downplay the win, how fast she could convince everyone that it had been a fluke, a lucky guess, nothing worth building expectations around. Word of her victory spread through the school and eventually reached home. Tanya was startled to learn that her daughter, the same girl who had been skipping classes, had suddenly become a local spelling prodigy. It was the beginning of a new kind of pressure in the household, a mixture of pride and confusion and fear, because a spotlight, even a small one, changes the way people look at you, and changes the way you have to look at yourself. Tanya did not quite know what to make of the news at first. Part of her felt a flicker of pride she had not expected, and part of her worried immediately about what came next, about permission slips and competition fees and time away from a household that already ran on razor-thin margins. She said little about it that first night, but the news stayed with her, quietly turning over in her mind long after Akeelah had gone to bed. The reluctant mentor. Winning the school bee opened a door Akeelah had not expected, and standing on the other side of that door was a man named Dr. Joshua Larrabee. Dr. Larrabee was a former college English professor, a friend of Mr. Welch's, a man carrying his own private grief behind a carefully guarded exterior. He lived not far from Akeelah's neighborhood, in a home filled floor to ceiling with books, a quiet fortress that reflected a mind that had once thrived in academia but now seemed to have withdrawn from much of the world. Neighbors rarely saw him. He kept his blinds drawn, tended a small garden with a kind of meticulous, almost ritualistic care, and had, over the years, developed a reputation as the reclusive man on the block who preferred solitude to company. Mr. Welch believed that if Akeelah had any real chance of advancing through the citywide and regional competitions, she would need serious coaching, and he believed Dr. Larrabee was the only person capable of giving her that. It took some convincing to get Dr. Larrabee to even agree to the first meeting, and when it finally happened, it did not go smoothly. Dr. Larrabee was blunt, almost cold, testing Akeelah with rapid-fire words and correcting her pronunciation and posture with a sharpness that caught her completely off guard. He circled her as she stood in his living room, firing off obscure vocabulary with the detached precision of a drill sergeant, seemingly unmoved by the fact that he was addressing an 11-year-old rather than a graduate student. Akeelah, unaccustomed to being challenged so directly, bristled at his manner and stormed out, deciding almost immediately that she wanted nothing to do with him. For a while, it seemed as though that would be the end of it. Akeelah tried to walk away from the spelling bee altogether, telling herself she never wanted it in the first place, that it was Mr. Welch's idea, not hers, and that she had better things to do with her time than memorize word lists under the supervision of a stranger who seemed to enjoy pointing out her mistakes. She threw herself back into her old routines, skipping classes, keeping to herself, trying to convince everyone around her, and perhaps most of all herself, that the spelling bee had simply been a passing moment, nothing more than a fluke that did not deserve a second thought. But something kept pulling her back. Perhaps it was the quiet thrill she had felt standing at the front of that classroom, feeling for the first time in a long while that she was good at something undeniably, unmistakably her own. Perhaps it was a small, stubborn part of her that did not like being told she could not do something, even when that something scared her. Or perhaps it was simply the nagging awareness that the words themselves had not stopped calling to her, that even in her attempts to walk away, she found herself silently spelling out street signs and cereal boxes and the names of unfamiliar medications on the counter at home, unable to fully switch off the part of her mind that had been so suddenly and thoroughly awakened. Eventually, Akeelah returned to Dr. Larrabee's house, and slowly, cautiously, the two of them began to build something neither of them had expected. Dr. Larrabee's coaching methods were unconventional and demanding. He did not simply hand Akeelah lists of words to memorize. He taught her the deeper architecture of language, the Latin and Greek roots that formed the skeleton beneath English vocabulary, the prefixes and suffixes that could unlock the spelling of a word Akeelah had never even heard before. He would write words on index cards and have her physically dissect them, breaking each one into its component parts, tracing its lineage back through centuries of borrowed language until the correct spelling revealed itself almost logically rather than arbitrarily. He taught her that spelling was not about rote memorization but about understanding, about seeing the logic hidden inside language the way a mathematician sees the logic hidden inside numbers. He also made her jump rope while spelling, forcing her to hold the words steady in her mind even while her body was in motion, a technique designed to simulate the kind of pressure she would eventually face on a competition stage, where nerves and adrenaline could just as easily scramble a word as any genuine gap in knowledge. He made her bounce a ball against the wall between letters, insisted she enunciate every syllable with theatrical clarity, and refused to let her mumble her way through an answer, insisting that confidence in delivery mattered just as much as accuracy in spelling. Their sessions were rigorous, sometimes exhausting, filled with drills that stretched late into the afternoon. Akeelah, still guarded and prickly, often pushed back against his strict, no-nonsense style, arguing with him over his methods, rolling her eyes at his demands, testing the limits of his patience the way a child tests the limits of any adult she is not yet sure she can trust. Dr. Larrabee, still nursing wounds of his own that he rarely spoke about, sometimes retreated into a coldness that made Akeelah wonder whether he even wanted to be teaching her at all. There were afternoons where he seemed to look straight through her, lost in some private memory that had nothing to do with the word in front of them, and Akeelah, sensitive as she was, could feel the weight of whatever he was carrying even without understanding its source. But beneath the friction, something real was forming. Dr. Larrabee began to see in Akeelah not just a promising student, but a reflection of potential he had once nurtured in someone else, someone whose absence hung heavily over his quiet, book-filled home, though the details of that loss remained mostly unspoken between them for a long while. Small moments began to soften the edges of their dynamic, a rare laugh shared over a particularly strange word, a flicker of pride crossing his face when Akeelah correctly spelled something well beyond her grade level, a gentleness that crept into his voice on the days when she arrived visibly tired or discouraged. Slowly, without either of them fully naming it, their relationship began to shift from obligation into something that resembled trust. A community finds its voice. As Akeelah advanced through the early rounds of competition, something began to shift not just within her but around her. Word spread through Crenshaw and the surrounding neighborhood that one of their own, a girl from a modest, struggling household, was competing at a level most people in the community had never had the chance to reach. Neighbors who had barely known Akeelah's name began stopping her on the street to wish her luck. Shop owners posted handmade signs in their windows. Her presence in local competitions started drawing small crowds of people who wanted to witness something rare, a moment where a child from their streets was being given a stage usually reserved for kids from far wealthier, far more privileged backgrounds. Barbers turned down their radios to ask how her practice was going. Elderly women from church pressed folded dollar bills into Tanya's hands, insisting it go toward whatever Akeelah needed to keep going. The corner store owner began keeping a small chalkboard by his register, updating it with Akeelah's latest results, as though tracking the standings of a beloved local sports team. This growing support meant a great deal to Akeelah, but it also added weight to everything she was doing. She was no longer just competing for herself. She had become, almost without asking for it, a symbol for an entire community's hope, a living answer to the unspoken question of whether a kid from a neighborhood like hers could ever truly compete on a national stage. That kind of pressure can be a beautiful thing and a suffocating one at the same time, and Akeelah felt both sides of it in equal measure. There were nights she lay awake turning the responsibility over in her mind, wondering what it would mean for the people cheering her on if she stumbled, if the words she had drilled 100 times suddenly slipped away from her under the lights, if the hope so many people had quietly pinned to her name turned out to be misplaced. Meanwhile, at home, the tension of her new life was becoming harder to ignore. Tanya struggled to understand exactly what her daughter was chasing, torn between pride in Akeelah's talent and a very real fear of what might happen if that talent led to disappointment, or worse, if it distracted Akeelah from the stability Tanya was desperately trying to maintain for her family. Tanya had already lost so much: a husband, a sense of normalcy, a measure of control over her older children's paths, and the idea of investing emotionally in a competition that could end in heartbreak felt, to her, like an unnecessary risk. Her hesitance sometimes came across as coldness, and it created distance between mother and daughter at a moment when Akeelah desperately needed her mother's belief. Terence, meanwhile, continued drifting further into the orbit of a local gang, a storyline that ran quietly but persistently beneath the main narrative, reminding both Akeelah and the audience of the stakes that existed just outside the walls of the spelling bee, in a world where a wrong turn could carry consequences far more permanent than losing a competition. Regionals and rivals. As Akeelah advanced to the regional spelling bee, she began encountering the kind of competitors she had never faced before: kids from wealthier schools, kids who had been training with private tutors for years, kids who walked into the competition hall with a level of polish and confidence that made Akeelah acutely aware of the gap between her world and theirs. She noticed the way their parents dressed, the ease with which they navigated unfamiliar hallways, the casual, practiced confidence with which they greeted judges twice their age. It was Akeelah's first real glimpse into a world defined by resources she had never had access to, and it left her quietly rattled even as she outwardly tried to project calm. Among these competitors was a boy named Javier Mendez, a kind, easygoing kid who, unlike many of the other contestants, treated Akeelah with genuine warmth rather than condescension. Javier became one of the first true friends Akeelah made through the competition, someone who understood the peculiar stress of the spelling bee circuit, and who offered her camaraderie rather than rivalry. He shared his own nervous habits with her, the way he tapped his fingers against his leg before his turn, the silly rhymes he invented to remember tricky letter combinations, and in doing so he made the entire experience feel a little less isolating, a reminder that even the most polished-looking competitors were, underneath it all, just as nervous as she was. The regional competition tested Akeelah in ways the school bee never had. The words grew more obscure, the pressure grew heavier, and the reality of what she was attempting began to feel more real with every round. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears as she stepped up to the microphone, the room falling silent around her, dozens of unfamiliar eyes watching to see whether the girl from South Los Angeles truly belonged on that stage. Dr. Larrabee's training paid off again and again as Akeelah calmly broke down unfamiliar words using the same root-based techniques he had drilled into her, tracing prefixes back to their Latin origins, identifying silent letters through patterns he had taught her to recognize almost instinctively. But the competition also exposed cracks in her confidence, moments where the enormity of what she was doing threatened to overwhelm her, where her mind went briefly, terrifyingly blank before the training took over and pulled her back from the edge. Despite the nerves, despite the unfamiliar surroundings, Akeelah advanced. Her victory at regionals sent a ripple of excitement through Crenshaw, transforming her from a locally known talent into a genuine source of citywide pride. It also deepened the bond between Akeelah and Dr. Larrabee, whose gruff exterior had, by this point, softened considerably in Akeelah's presence, even if he still rarely allowed himself to show it outright. But success brought new complications. As Akeelah's profile grew, so did the expectations placed on her, from her school, from her community, and increasingly from herself. She began to feel the specific, suffocating fear that so many gifted young people experience, the fear not of failure itself but of losing the identity she had built around being exceptional, of discovering that the further she went, the more likely she was to eventually hit a wall she could not spell her way past. Cracks beneath the surface. It was around this stage of the competition that Dr. Larrabee's own hidden grief began to surface more clearly. Akeelah discovered, through pieces gathered here and there, that Dr. Larrabee had once had a daughter of his own, a daughter he had lost, and that his retreat from the academic world and from much of society had been, at least in part, a response to a pain he had never fully processed. This revelation reframed the entire mentorship in Akeelah's eyes. She began to understand that Dr. Larrabee was not simply a strict tutor drilling her on vocabulary, but a grieving father who had found, in her, an unexpected chance to pour the guidance and care he had once hoped to give his own child into someone who badly needed it. This deeper understanding did not erase the friction between them, but it changed its texture. Their disagreements, when they happened, began to carry the weight of two people who cared deeply about each other rather than the coldness of strangers forced together by circumstance. Akeelah, in turn, began opening up more to Dr. Larrabee about her own fears, about her father's death, about the tension at home, about the fear that no matter how many words she spelled correctly, she would never quite belong in the world the spelling bee circuit represented. In these quieter moments between drills, sitting among his towering bookshelves with a mug of tea going cold on the table, the two of them began to resemble something closer to family than teacher and student, two people who had each lost someone and found, unexpectedly, a small measure of healing in each other's company. Meanwhile, tension in Akeelah's household continued to simmer. Tanya, still wrestling with her own fears, at one point pulled back her support entirely, worried that the entire pursuit was pulling Akeelah away from stability rather than toward it. This created one of the film's most emotionally charged stretches, as Akeelah found herself caught between a mother who loved her but could not fully embrace her ambition, and a mentor who believed in her talent but could not replace the parental support she still desperately craved. Yet even in this difficult stretch, the wider community refused to let Akeelah give up. Neighbors, teachers, and friends rallied around her in small but meaningful ways, offering encouragement, contributing what little money they could to support her continued participation, and reminding her, again and again, that she was not just spelling for herself but for every kid in her neighborhood who had ever been told, directly or indirectly, that this kind of success was not meant for people like them. The city and district competitions. As Akeelah pushed forward into the city and district level spelling bees, the competition intensified even further, and so did the visibility surrounding her journey. Local news outlets began to take notice of the story unfolding in South Los Angeles, a story that carried an inspirational shape too compelling to ignore, an underdog narrative built not around fiction but around a real 11-year-old girl chasing something extraordinary. Reporters began showing up outside her school, asking her questions she did not always know how to answer, framing her journey in language that felt, at times, bigger and heavier than the girl actually living it. This added yet another layer of pressure, as Akeelah now had to perform not only in front of judges and fellow competitors but under the growing gaze of cameras and reporters eager to turn her into a headline, a symbol, a story with a tidy beginning and an uncertain, high-stakes ending still waiting to be written. Dr. Larrabee's training grew even more intense during this period, pushing Akeelah through longer sessions, harder words, and more rigorous drilling on etymology and language structure. Their relationship, though still occasionally tense, had by now developed into something resembling a genuine partnership, built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of what was at stake. Akeelah began to trust him not just as a coach but as someone who genuinely wanted the best for her, someone whose belief in her abilities often outpaced her own. At the district competition, Akeelah faced her most difficult test yet, encountering competitors whose preparation and polish rivaled anything she had seen before. The stakes felt enormous, not just because of the trophy on the line but because of everything riding on her shoulders: her family's pride, her community's hope, and her own fragile, still forming sense of self-worth. Through sheer determination and the deep well of knowledge Dr. Larrabee had helped her build, Akeelah advanced once again, securing her place among an elite group of young spellers who would go on to compete at the national level in Washington, D.C. The victory was electric. For a community that had rarely seen one of its own reach such heights, Akeelah's advancement to the Scripps National Spelling Bee felt like a collective triumph, a moment that transcended the competition itself and became a symbol of what was possible when talent was given the chance to be nurtured rather than ignored. But amid the celebration, cracks continued to widen elsewhere. Terrence's involvement with the local gang deepened, creating moments of real danger and fear within the household, a stark reminder that success in one corner of a family's life does not erase struggle in another. Tanya, torn between worry for her son and pride in her daughter, found herself stretched to an almost unbearable degree, and it was during this period that the emotional walls she had built around herself slowly, painfully, began to come down, as she realized that shutting herself off from Akeelah's dream was not protecting her family, only isolating her from it. Preparing for the national stage. With the national competition looming, the story shifted into its most emotionally dense stretch. Akeelah, now fully immersed in her training with Dr. Larrabee, faced words of a complexity that pushed even her formidable natural talent to its limits, words drawn from medicine, botany, law, and languages she had never studied, each one demanding a level of precision that left little room for guesswork. Long hours were spent poring over etymological charts, practicing pronunciation, and building the kind of instinctive fluency with language that only relentless repetition and understanding could produce. Some evenings the sessions ran so late that Tanya would arrive to pick Akeelah up only to find her still hunched over index cards at Dr. Larrabee's kitchen table, too absorbed to notice the time slipping away. Yet even as her academic preparation intensified, Akeelah's emotional preparation lagged behind, weighed down by lingering insecurities about whether she truly belonged among the wealthier, more experienced competitors she would soon be facing on a national stage, competitors whose entire young lives had been quietly engineered toward exactly this moment. It was during this stretch that Dr. Larrabee, in one of the film's most quietly powerful moments, shared with Akeelah a piece of wisdom that would echo through the rest of the story: the idea that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure, and that it is often our own light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. This idea, borrowed from the writings of Marianne Williamson, became a thematic anchor for Akeelah's entire arc, a reminder that her hesitation to fully embrace her gift was rooted not in a lack of ability but in a fear of what fully claiming that ability might mean, for her sense of identity, for her relationships, and for the expectations she would carry moving forward. As the family prepared to travel to Washington, D.C. for the national competition, a fragile new sense of unity began to take shape. Tanya, moved by the growing realization of just how much her daughter's journey meant, both to Akeelah and to the community rallying behind her, began to soften, offering the kind of support Akeelah had quietly longed for throughout the entire process. Even Terrence, in his own complicated way, showed signs of being pulled by his sister's example, a subtle suggestion that Akeelah's courage was beginning to ripple outward, touching corners of her family that had seemed impossible to reach. Washington, D.C. Arriving in Washington, D.C. for the Scripps National Spelling Bee, Akeelah found herself immersed in a world entirely different from anything she had experienced before, a world of polished hotel lobbies, wealthy families, and competitors who had been training since early childhood with resources and support systems Akeelah could barely imagine. The scale of the competition itself was staggering, filled with contestants from every corner of the country, each one carrying their own story of dedication and sacrifice. Banners hung from the ceiling of the convention hall, cameras lined the edges of the stage, and rows of seats stretched further back than Akeelah had ever seen at any of her earlier competitions. For a moment, standing at the entrance of that enormous hall, the sheer scale of it all threatened to swallow her whole. A small girl from a small street in South Los Angeles suddenly standing at the center of a stage built for the whole nation to watch. The hotel where the family stayed buzzed with a nervous energy all its own, parents quizzing children in hallways at all hours, flashcards scattered across breakfast tables, whispered pep talks exchanged outside elevator doors. Akeelah watched it all with a mixture of fascination and unease, aware that many of these families had spent years and considerable sums of money preparing for this single week, resources her own family simply did not have. And yet, for all the polish surrounding her, she began to notice something reassuring too, that nerves did not discriminate by income, that the trembling hands and racing hearts she felt before stepping onto that stage were shared, in one form or another, by nearly every child in that hotel. Among the competitors Akeelah encountered was Dylan Chiu, a boy whose talent rivaled her own but whose relationship with his father carried a much darker undertone. Mr. Chiu pushed his son with an intensity that bordered on cruelty, demanding perfection and offering little warmth or encouragement in return. Watching Dylan's strained relationship with his father gave Akeelah a new perspective on her own journey, revealing that even competitors who seemed to have every advantage were carrying burdens of their own, and that the pressure to succeed could sometimes come at a devastating emotional cost. As the competition progressed through its early rounds, Akeelah found herself growing closer to several of her fellow contestants, forming friendships that cut across the boundaries of background and privilege that had once made her feel like an outsider. She and Dylan, in particular, developed an unspoken understanding, two kids caught in the crushing gravity of expectation, each recognizing something of themselves in the other despite their vastly different circumstances. Meanwhile, tension between Akeelah and Dr. Larrabee resurfaced at a critical moment, when a disagreement over strategy and control led to a painful rift between mentor and student, one that threatened to derail Akeelah's confidence right as the competition reached its most difficult stage. The rift forced both of them to confront the deeper fears they had been avoiding, Akeelah's fear of losing the one adult figure who had consistently believed in her, and Dr. Larrabee's fear of allowing himself to care again after the devastating loss he had carried for so long. The heart of the competition. As the national competition intensified, Akeelah faced round after round of increasingly difficult words, her composure tested not only by the complexity of the vocabulary but by the mounting emotional weight of everything happening around her. The strain of her rift with Dr. Larrabee left her feeling unmoored, competing without the steady presence she had come to rely on so heavily throughout her journey. In one particularly tense round, faced with a word she likely could have spelled correctly, Akeelah intentionally misspelled it, a quiet act of self-sabotage rooted in her fear of standing out too far ahead of her peers, of becoming someone too different from the world she had grown up in. This moment became a turning point in the story, forcing Akeelah, along with everyone supporting her, to confront the true nature of the battle she was fighting. It was never really about whether she had the talent to win. It was about whether she had the courage to fully accept and embrace that talent, without shrinking herself to fit expectations shaped by fear rather than truth. Dylan, sensing what had happened, quietly confronted Akeelah about her choice, urging her not to let fear rob her of the opportunity she had worked so hard to earn. Word of Akeelah's inner struggle eventually reached her community back home, and in a moving display of collective support, friends, neighbors, and family pooled together resources to send a group to Washington, D.C. to stand behind her in person, ensuring that Akeelah would not have to face the most difficult moments of the competition without the people who believed in her most. Dr. Larrabee, despite the tension that had grown between them, also found his way back into her corner, arriving to lend his support at a moment when Akeelah needed him most, a reconciliation that underscored just how deeply their bond had grown throughout the journey. With her community and her mentor once again standing behind her, Akeelah found the strength to re-engage fully with the competition, drawing on everything Dr. Larrabee had taught her, not just about language, but about resilience, identity, and the courage required to stand fully in one's own gifts without apology. The final rounds. As the competition narrowed toward its final rounds, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. One by one, the remaining competitors fell away, tripped up by words that seemed almost cruelly designed to expose the smallest gaps in preparation, until only a handful of contestants remained standing beneath the bright stage lights. Akeelah and Dylan emerged as two of the strongest remaining competitors, their earlier friendship now infused with a bittersweet awareness that only one of them could ultimately claim victory. Dylan's relationship with his father remained a heavy undercurrent throughout these final stages, adding an emotional complexity to his performance that mirrored, in many ways, the emotional battles Akeelah had faced throughout her own journey. Every time Dylan glanced toward the audience, Akeelah could see him searching for some flicker of approval from his father's tightly composed expression, approval that rarely, if ever, seemed to arrive. In one of the story's most poignant moments, as the pressure reached its peak, Akeelah and Dylan found a quiet moment together, away from the noise and the judges and the expectations, where they spoke honestly about the toll the competition had taken on them both. Dylan admitted, in a rare moment of vulnerability, just how exhausted he was by the constant demand for perfection, how the competition had stopped feeling like an achievement, and had instead become something closer to a burden he could not set down. Akeelah, in turn, shared her own fears, the guilt she felt over the resources her family had sacrificed to get her here, the fear that failing now would somehow validate every doubt anyone had ever quietly harbored about kids from her neighborhood. Rather than viewing each other purely as rivals, they recognized in one another a shared understanding of what it meant to carry the weight of other people's hopes, and their mutual respect deepened into something that transcended the competition itself. As the final rounds unfolded, both competitors pushed themselves to their absolute limits, drawing on years of preparation, sacrifice, and support from the people who had guided them to this moment. Word after word passed between them, some ordinary, some so obscure that gasps rippled quietly through the audience each time one of them managed to spell it correctly. Akeelah's mind moved through each challenge with the same root-based precision Dr. Larrabee had spent months instilling in her, breaking apart Latin and Greek origins, listening for the subtle clues hidden in pronunciation, trusting the architecture of language to guide her toward the answer even when the word itself felt entirely unfamiliar. The tension in the room mirrored the tension that had built throughout the entire story, culminating in a climax that tested not just vocabulary and memory, but the full emotional journey each character had undergone. Without giving away the specific final outcome for those who have not yet experienced the film themselves, the resolution of the national competition ties together every theme the story had been building toward: community, resilience, identity, and the idea that true success is measured not only by trophies, but by the courage to fully become who you are meant to be, regardless of where you come from. Coming home. In the aftermath of the national competition, Akeelah returns home to a neighborhood forever changed by her journey, a community that watched one of its own step onto a national stage and refused to shrink in the face of it. The streets she once walked feeling invisible now greeted her with a warmth that felt almost overwhelming, neighbors calling out her name, children she barely knew asking her to spell words just to watch her do it, a quiet but unmistakable shift in the way an entire neighborhood saw itself reflected in one young girl's courage. The relationships strengthened throughout the story, with her mother, with Dr. Larrabee, with her newfound friends from the competition circuit, carry forward into a new chapter of Akeelah's life, one defined not by fear or hiding, but by the confidence she had fought so hard to claim. Tanya's arc reaches its quiet resolution as well, her earlier hesitance replaced by a deep, unwavering pride in her daughter, a reminder that even in households stretched thin by loss and hardship, love finds its way through, often in the most unexpected forms. The distance that had once stood between mother and daughter closes into something warmer, built not on grand declarations but on small, steady gestures, a hand on the shoulder, a proud smile held a little longer than necessary, the quiet reassurance that Tanya had been paying closer attention all along than Akeelah ever realized. Dr. Larrabee, too, finds a measure of healing through his bond with Akeelah, his own grief softened by the chance to guide someone through the very kind of triumph he had once hoped to share with his own child. The walls he had spent years building around himself, walls made of silence and solitude and unspoken sorrow, begin to come down, not all at once, but steadily, the way ice thaws under a patient sun. Through Akeelah, he rediscovers a purpose that had gone missing from his life, and through him, she finds the kind of steady, unwavering belief that every child deserves but not every child receives. Even Terence, whose path through the story had run quietly parallel to his sister's, shows signs of being pulled back from the edge he had been drifting toward, moved in his own way by watching his little sister refuse to let her circumstances define the limits of what she could become. It is a subtle thread, never fully resolved with dramatic finality, but it lingers in the background of the film's closing moments, a suggestion that courage, once demonstrated, has a way of rippling outward into places we do not always expect. By the film's final moments, Akeelah stands not just as a spelling champion in the eyes of her community, but as a symbol of what becomes possible when talent is nurtured rather than dismissed, when community rallies around its brightest young minds instead of allowing circumstance to dim their light, and when a child is finally given permission to stop hiding and start shining. The girl who once shrank from attention, who buried her gift for fear of what it might cost her, walks away from Washington, D.C. having learned the truest lesson of all, that the words she had spent so long collecting in secret were never meant to stay hidden, and that her own light, once she finally allowed herself to embrace it fully, was never something to fear. That is the complete story of Akeelah and the Bee, a film that reminds us, again and again, that greatness often grows in the most unexpected soil, and that the people who believe in us, even when we struggle to believe in ourselves, are often the ones who help us become who we were always meant to be. Akeelah and the Bee, 2006, Cast Life Histories. Welcome back to Review and Facts. We have already walked through the story of Akeelah and the Bee in full, and today we are turning our attention to the people who brought that story to life. Behind every unforgettable performance in this film is a real person with their own long and winding journey through the entertainment industry, and some of those journeys are just as compelling as the film itself. So let us settle in and take a proper, detailed look at the actors who made Akeelah and the Bee the beloved film it became. Keke Palmer. At the very center of Akeelah and the Bee stands Keke Palmer, the young actress who carried the entire emotional weight of the film on her shoulders and did so with a maturity that stunned critics and audiences alike. Born Lauren Kiana Palmer on August 26, 1993, in Harvey, Illinois, a suburb south of Chicago, she was raised in the nearby community of Robbins by her parents, Sharon and Larry Palmer, both of whom had backgrounds in acting themselves before turning their attention toward raising their family. Her father worked in a factory and also served as a volunteer Catholic deacon, while her mother worked as a teacher, and together they instilled in their daughter a strong sense of discipline and faith that would carry through much of her later career. Her nickname, Keke, was given to her by her older sister when she was still a small child, and it stuck so firmly that it eventually became her professional identity, the name the world would come to know her by. From a very young age, Keke displayed an unusual pull toward performance. She began singing in church, developing a powerful voice that stood out even among a congregation full of talented singers, and it did not take long for that early exposure to develop into something more. As a young girl, she performed in a stage show at a well-known Chicago tourist attraction, gaining early experience in front of live audiences that would later serve her well on film sets. At around the age of 9, she auditioned for a stage production of The Lion King, a moment that marked one of her first serious steps into the world of professional performance. Her natural talent and her surprisingly commanding stage presence for someone so young quickly caught the attention of industry professionals, and her parents made the significant decision to relocate the family to California in order to support her growing career, a sacrifice that speaks to just how seriously her family took her early promise. It was a decision that uprooted the entire household, moving them away from the familiarity of the Chicago area and into the far more competitive, unpredictable world of the Los Angeles entertainment industry, a gamble that would take years before it fully paid off but that ultimately proved to be one of the most consequential choices of Keek's young life. Keek's screen debut came in 2004, when she appeared in small roles in Barbershop 2, Back in Business and The Wool Cap, modest beginnings that nonetheless placed her firmly on the radar of casting directors looking for young talent capable of holding their own alongside seasoned adult actors. It was in 2006, however, that her career truly began to take shape, with two significant roles arriving in quick succession. She appeared in Tyler Perry's Medea's Family Reunion, and then, in the same year, she landed the leading role that would define the early chapter of her career, the role of Akeelah Anderson in Akeelah and the Bee. Her performance in the film earned widespread critical praise, with many reviewers singling her out as one of the most gifted young actresses to appear on screen in years. That same year, in recognition of her talent, she became one of the youngest nominees in the history of the Screen Actors Guild Awards for a Leading Actress honor, an extraordinary achievement for a performer still in the earliest stages of her career. The years following Akeelah and the Bee saw Kiki expand rapidly across multiple areas of entertainment. In 2007, she released her debut studio album, So Uncool, through Atlantic Records, showcasing the musical talent that had first drawn her toward performance as a child singing in church. Though the album did not achieve major chart success, reaching a modest position on the R&B charts, it further demonstrated her range as an entertainer capable of moving fluidly between acting and music, an early sign of the multi-hyphenate career she would eventually build. Her television career reached a new level of visibility in 2008, when she was cast as the lead in Nickelodeon's True Jackson, VP, a sitcom in which she played a teenager unexpectedly promoted to a top executive position at a fashion company. The show ran until 2011 and turned Kiki into a household name among younger audiences, establishing her as one of the highest-paid child stars working in television at that time, and giving her a platform that extended her reach well beyond the audiences who had first discovered her through Akeelah and the Bee. As she moved into adulthood, Kiki deliberately sought out more mature and challenging material, appearing in dramas such as Imperial Dreams and the horror thriller Animal, projects that allowed her to distance herself from her earlier image as a beloved children's television star and demonstrate that her range extended well beyond the family-friendly material that had defined her adolescence. She made her Broadway debut in 2014, taking on the title role of Ella in a production of Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, becoming, notably, the first African-American woman and the youngest performer to play the role in that particular production, a milestone that added a significant new chapter to her already impressive resume and drew widespread critical acclaim for her singing and stage presence. Around the same period, she branched into television hosting, fronting shows such as Just Kiki and later Strahan, Sarah and Kiki, further proving her versatility beyond scripted performance, while also taking on a recurring role in the second season of Masters of Sex, continuing to build her credibility as a serious dramatic actress. Keek's film career continued to diversify through the following decade, with voice roles in major animated franchises including the Ice Age series and Pixar's Lightyear, alongside live-action roles in acclaimed films such as Hustlers and Jordan Peele's Nope, the latter of which introduced her to an even wider global audience and further cemented her reputation as a serious dramatic performer. In more recent years, she has taken on hosting duties for the revived NBC game show Password, continuing to expand her presence across multiple facets of the entertainment industry. She has also become an outspoken advocate for mental health awareness, speaking candidly about the pressures of growing up in the public eye and encouraging young people to prioritize their emotional well-being amid the demands of ambition and public scrutiny. In 2023, Kiki became a mother, welcoming her son and describing the experience as one of the most transformative moments of her life, adding yet another dimension to a career that began decades earlier with a small girl singing in a Chicago church, never imagining just how far that voice would eventually carry her. Lawrence Fishburne. Playing the role of Dr. Joshua Larrabee, Akeelah's demanding and ultimately transformative mentor, was Lawrence Fishburne, an actor whose career by the time of the film's release already spanned more than 3 decades and included some of the most iconic performances in modern cinema. Born Lawrence John Fishburne III on July 30, 1961, in Augusta, Georgia, he was the son of Hattie Bell Crawford, a junior high school mathematics and science teacher, and Lawrence John Fishburne Jr., who worked as a juvenile corrections officer. His parents separated when he was still quite young, and he was raised primarily by his mother, who relocated with him to Brooklyn, New York, where he grew up in a culturally diverse neighborhood that would later shape his broader perspective on identity and heritage. Fishburne's mother recognized his natural talent early and encouraged him to pursue acting, helping him secure auditions for stage productions around New York. He landed his first professional role at the remarkably young age of 10, appearing in a New York stage production, and by 1973, at just 12 years old, he had already made his television debut, portraying a character on the long-running ABC soap opera One Life to Live, a role that gave him steady early exposure to the discipline required of a working actor. His film debut followed 2 years later in Cornbread, Earl and Me, a modest but important credit that helped establish him within the industry at an unusually young age. What truly set his early career apart, however, came in 1976, when at only 14 years old, he was cast in Francis Ford Coppola's Vietnam War epic Apocalypse Now, having reportedly lied about his age to secure the role. The production sent him to the Philippines for an extended and notoriously difficult shoot, one plagued by monsoons, budget overruns, and a production timeline that stretched on for well over a year. Despite the grueling conditions, the experience gave the teenage Fishburne an early and intense education in serious filmmaking alongside some of the era's most respected actors and filmmakers, and by the time the film was finally released in 1979, he had effectively spent his entire adolescence being shaped by one of the most demanding productions in Hollywood history. Throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Fishburne continued building his career steadily, taking on a wide range of stage and screen roles that gradually established him as a serious, versatile talent. He became a familiar face to television audiences of the era through recurring appearances on Pee-wee's Playhouse, where he portrayed the character Cowboy Curtis, a role that introduced him to a younger generation of viewers even as he continued pursuing more serious dramatic work on stage and in film. His breakthrough into a new level of recognition arrived in the early 1990s. In 1990, he appeared in the controversial crime drama King of New York, and the following year he delivered a powerful performance in John Singleton's Boys in the Hood, a film that captured the realities of life in South Los Angeles with unflinching honesty, a thematic echo that would resurface years later in his work on Akeelah and the Bee. In 1992, Fishburne earned a Tony Award for his performance in August Wilson's play 2 Trains Running, along with an Emmy Award for his role in the anthology series Tribeca, cementing his reputation as an actor capable of excelling across stage, film, and television alike. The following year brought what remains one of the defining performances of his career, his portrayal of musician Ike Turner in the biographical film What's Love Got to Do with It, opposite Angela Bassett, who portrayed Tina Turner. His performance earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, a remarkable achievement that placed him among the most respected dramatic actors of his generation. In 1995, he made history as the first African-American actor to portray the title role in a major film adaptation of Shakespeare's Othello, a landmark performance that further demonstrated his range and ambition as a performer willing to take on the most demanding classical material. Fishburne's career reached its widest point of global recognition in 1999, when he took on the role of Morpheus in The Matrix, a science fiction film that became a cultural phenomenon and redefined the genre for a new generation of filmmakers and audiences. His portrayal of the calm, philosophical mentor guiding Keanu Reeves's character through a reality-altering journey became one of the most iconic performances of his career, delivering lines and imagery that would go on to permeate popular culture well beyond the world of cinema itself. He reprised the role in the sequels The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, both released in 2003, cementing Morpheus as one of the defining characters of his long career. Around this same period, he also branched into writing and directing, making his behind-the-camera debut with the film Once in a Life, based on a play he had also written, demonstrating an ambition to shape stories from behind the camera as well as in front of it. He also took on the role of a determined police sergeant in Clint Eastwood's acclaimed drama Mystic River in 2003, further showcasing his ability to move fluidly between blockbuster franchise work and smaller, character-driven dramas. By the time Akeelah and the Bee entered production, Fishburne was not only cast as its emotional anchor but also served as one of its producers, a role that reflected just how personally invested he was in bringing this particular story to the screen. His involvement behind the scenes helped shape the project from its earliest stages, and his decision to attach himself so fully to a modestly budgeted independent drama, at a point in his career when he could easily have continued chasing larger studio paychecks, spoke to a genuine passion for the material and its message. His performance as Dr. Larrabee, a man carrying his own quiet grief while guiding a young girl toward her full potential, resonated deeply with audiences and critics, many of whom praised the restrained, layered nature of his portrayal. In the years following the film's release, Fishburne continued to work steadily across a wide range of projects, appearing in Mission Impossible 3 alongside Tom Cruise, taking on a recurring role as Dr. Raymond Langston on CSI: Crime Scene Investigation, and later joining the John Wick franchise as the enigmatic Bowery King, a role he would reprise across multiple sequels throughout the 2010s. He also became a beloved presence on the television series Blackish, playing the family patriarch Pops, further showcasing his range as he moved fluidly between intense dramatic work and warm, comedic performances. His filmography during this period also included roles in major studio productions such as Predators, Man of Steel, and Contagion, proving that his ability to anchor both intimate dramas and large-scale blockbusters had only grown more versatile with age. Beyond his acting career, Fishburne has been recognized for his humanitarian work, including his role as a UNICEF ambassador focused on raising awareness around HIV and AIDS, adding a layer of real-world advocacy to a career already defined by decades of thoughtful, socially conscious storytelling. Angela Bassett. Portraying Tanya Anderson, Akeelah's mother, was Angela Bassett, an actress whose career has long been defined by her portrayals of strong, historically significant women and by performances of remarkable emotional depth. Born Angela Evelyn Bassett on August 16, 1958, in New York City, she was raised primarily by her mother, Betty, a social worker, after her parents separated. She grew up alongside her sister, Danette, in St. Petersburg, Florida, in a household that placed a strong emphasis on education and discipline despite the family's modest means. Bassett has spoken candidly over the years about the challenges of that upbringing, describing a mother who worked tirelessly to provide stability for her daughters while instilling in them a deep sense of resilience and self-respect that would carry Bassett through the many years of rejection and uncertainty that often accompany a career in acting. She has spoken about a pivotal moment during her high school years when she attended a Kennedy Center production of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men, starring James Earl Jones, an experience that left such a profound impression on her that she decided then and there that acting was the path she wanted to pursue, a decision that felt almost like a calling rather than a career choice. That decision led her to Yale University, where she earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in African American Studies, graduating in 1980, and she later returned to Yale to complete a Master of Fine Arts degree from the Yale School of Drama in 1983. It was during her time at Yale that she met fellow actor Courtney B. Vance, who would later become her husband, and the two formed a bond during their student years that would eventually blossom into one of Hollywood's most enduring marriages. After graduating, Bassett took on a variety of small jobs to support herself, including a stint working as a receptionist at a beauty salon, while steadily building her acting resume through stage productions in New York. She made notable appearances in productions of August Wilson's plays, including Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and Joe Turner's Come and Gone, performances that helped establish her reputation within the world of serious theater and connected her early on with material that explored the depth and complexity of the African American experience, themes that would continue to define much of her career in the decades that followed. Bassett's early screen career included modest supporting roles in films such as F/X and Kindergarten Cop, roles that offered little indication of the dramatic heights she would soon reach. But her career began to shift meaningfully in 1991, when she delivered a powerful, understated performance as a single mother in John Singleton's Boys in the Hood, marking the first of several collaborations she would share with Lawrence Fishburne over the years. The film's unflinching portrayal of life in South Los Angeles would later echo thematically in Akeelah and the Bee, a connection that gave Bassett's casting in the later film an added layer of resonance. The following year, she took on the role of Betty Shabazz, wife of the civil rights leader Malcolm X, in Spike Lee's acclaimed biographical film Malcolm X, opposite Denzel Washington, a performance that further established her as an actress capable of bringing historical figures to life with dignity and nuance, and one she would revisit years later in the film Panther. The role that would define the next major chapter of her career arrived in 1993. When she was cast as Tina Turner in the biographical film What's Love Got to Do with It, opposite Fishburne as Ike Turner. Preparing for the role required months of intense physical training to master Turner's distinctive stage movements and vocal style, and her transformative performance, capturing both the vulnerability and the eventual triumphant resilience of the iconic singer, earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress and a Golden Globe Award win, cementing her status as one of the most respected dramatic actresses of her generation. In the years that followed, she continued building an impressive body of work, appearing in Waiting to Exhale in 1995 alongside Whitney Houston, and later in How Stella Got Her Groove Back in 1998, both adaptations of novels by author Terry McMillan that resonated strongly with audiences and helped broaden the kinds of stories mainstream Hollywood was willing to tell about Black women's lives. Bassett continued to gravitate toward roles portraying real historical figures throughout her career, including her portrayal of Rosa Parks in the television film The Rosa Parks Story and Katherine Jackson in The Jacksons, An American Dream. By the time she took on the role of Tanya Anderson in Akeelah and the Bee, Bassett had already built a reputation as one of Hollywood's most respected dramatic performers, and her portrayal of a mother torn between fear and pride added crucial emotional grounding to the film's story. Her career continued to flourish in the years following the film's release, with a particularly notable resurgence in the 2010s and beyond, including her role as Queen Ramonda in Marvel's Black Panther and its sequel Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, the latter earning her a Golden Globe Award, along with a recurring role across multiple seasons of the anthology series American Horror Story. Bassett married Courtney B. Vance in 1997, and the two have remained one of Hollywood's most enduring and respected couples, frequently collaborating on stage and screen projects throughout their careers. Curtis Armstrong. Taking on the role of Mr. Welch, the school principal whose decision to enter Akeelah into the spelling bee sets the entire story in motion, was Curtis Armstrong, a character actor whose career stretches back to the early 1980s and who built a reputation as one of the most reliably memorable comedic supporting actors of his generation. Born on November 27, 1953, In Detroit, Michigan, Armstrong spent portions of his childhood divided between Michigan and Geneva, Switzerland, where his father's work took the family for a period of time. He has described his childhood as one spent largely between the covers of books, a bookish sensibility that would later inform the kinds of quick-witted, verbally dexterous characters he became known for playing. He graduated from Berkeley High School in Michigan in 1972, and it was around this time that his interest in the arts began to take clearer shape. Armstrong studied at the Academy of Dramatic Arts in Rochester, Michigan, and spent nearly a decade honing his craft through stage work in New York and touring productions around the country before making the transition into film, putting in the kind of long, unglamorous apprenticeship that many successful character actors describe as essential to developing their instincts. His breakthrough came in 1983, when he was cast in the comedy Risky Business, starring a young Tom Cruise, playing Cruise's smarmy, fast-talking friend Miles Dalby, a role that gave him his first taste of mainstream visibility. Armstrong has often spoken about the film's lasting cultural impact, particularly his character's memorable delivery of a line that has since become one of the most quoted phrases from 1980s cinema, and he has recalled with some amusement his early observations of Tom Cruise on set, sensing even then that his young co-star was destined for major stardom. The following year, in 1984, Armstrong took on the role that would follow him for the rest of his career, playing the character of Dudley Booger Dawson in the comedy Revenge of the Nerds. Though the role was far from the leading part he had originally hoped to secure, and though he initially resisted the offer, believing the character to be little more than a crude sight gag with no real depth, it became an unexpected career-defining moment, with Armstrong later reprising the character across multiple sequels, including Revenge of the Nerds 2, Nerds in Paradise, and 2 television sequel films. Armstrong has spoken candidly, and with good humor about being recognized for the role decades later, noting that being forever associated with a nose-picking, belching fraternity brother did not bother him in the slightest, and that he came to embrace the role as an important part of his professional identity, one that opened far more doors than it ever closed. Beyond his film work, Armstrong found significant success on television, taking on the role of Herbert Viola in the popular series Moonlighting, which ran from 1985 to 1989 and further established him as a talented comedic performer capable of sustaining a role across an extended television run. Working alongside Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd during a period when the show was one of the most talked about series on American television. His film credits during this era also included the cult favorite Better Off Dead, alongside a steady stream of supporting roles that showcased his versatility across comedy and drama alike. In the years leading up to Akeelah and the Bee, Armstrong had also taken on more dramatic supporting work, including a role in the acclaimed biographical film Ray, in which he portrayed record producer Ahmet Ertegun, demonstrating a range that extended well beyond the comedic roles for which he first became known and proving to industry observers that there was considerably more depth to his talent than the booger persona alone might have suggested. His portrayal of Mr. Welch in Akeelah and the Bee showcased a more restrained, grounded side of his acting, playing a school administrator whose belief in Akeelah's potential, however initially self-interested, ultimately sets her entire journey into motion. In the years following the film, Armstrong continued to work steadily across film and television, including a notable run as the Angel Metatron on the long-running supernatural drama series Supernatural, a role he would return to across multiple seasons and one that introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans, as well as voice work on the animated series American Dad. He later published a memoir chronicling his decades-long career in the entertainment industry, titled Revenge of the Nerd, offering a candid and often humorous look back at a career built on a series of unforgettable supporting roles, capped by the recognition that his most famous character, however unglamorous, gave him a lasting place in the history of American comedy. Tsai Ma. Rounding out the film's principal cast was Tsai Ma, who portrayed Mr. Chiu, the demanding father of rival competitor Dylan Chiu, a role that added significant emotional complexity to the film's exploration of pressure and expectation. Ma was born in Hong Kong in 1962, the youngest of 7 children, and his family relocated to the United States when he was around 5 years old, following political turmoil that led many families to seek stability abroad. Settling in Staten Island, New York, his parents opened and operated a Chinese restaurant called Ho Wa, and Ma spent much of his childhood helping out at the family business, balancing the practical demands of a working immigrant household with an increasingly strong pull toward the arts. Growing up as the youngest of such a large family gave him an early education in patience and observation, qualities that would later serve him well in a career built largely around quiet, understated performances rather than showy dramatics. His interest in performance was first sparked during an elementary school production of Annie Get Your Gun, in which he played the role of Buffalo Bill, an early experience that planted the seed for what would eventually become a lifelong career. Despite this early passion, Ma initially attempted to satisfy his traditional parents' expectations by exploring pre-med and political science studies, a common tension for many children of immigrant families navigating the pull between practical stability and creative ambition. Ultimately, his love for performance won out, and he went on to study classical theater and dance at Columbia University, where he earned a degree in theater, formally committing himself to a career on stage and screen despite the uncertainty that path represented for a first-generation immigrant family that had sacrificed so much to build a stable life in a new country. Ma began building his career through New York's vibrant theater scene throughout the 1970s, taking on off-Broadway roles while continuing to work at his family's restaurant to support himself during the early, uncertain years of his career, a period he has since described as foundational in shaping the discipline and resilience he would carry through the decades that followed. His screen career gained meaningful traction in the early 1990s, with a notably physical role in the 1992 action film Rapid Fire, in which he engaged in an intense hand-to-hand fight sequence with Brandon Lee, son of martial arts legend Bruce Lee, a role that first demonstrated his range beyond the quieter, more restrained characters he would later become associated with. Throughout the remainder of the decade, Ma became an increasingly familiar presence in major studio films, appearing in Dante's Peak in 1997 and the hit action comedy Rush Hour in 1998, a franchise he would later return to with a role in Rush Hour 3 in 2007. He has been fluent across English, Cantonese, and Mandarin throughout his career, a linguistic versatility that has allowed him to move fluidly between American and international productions. By the time he took on the role of Mr. Chu in Akeelah Anderson, Ma had already built a substantial career playing complex authority figures, and his performance in the film added a quietly devastating dimension to the story, portraying a father whose demand for perfection came at a real emotional cost to his son. In the years following the film, Ma's career continued to expand significantly, with a recurring role as Qingxi across multiple seasons of the acclaimed series 24, alongside appearances in prestige projects such as The Quiet American, opposite Michael Caine, and the Coen brothers' comedy The Lady Killers, alongside Tom Hanks. His career reached new heights of recognition in the years that followed, with a widely praised performance as a stoic grandfather in the acclaimed drama The Farewell in 2019, and a major role as the protagonist's father in Disney's live-action adaptation of Mulan in 2020. A casting choice that was celebrated for the visibility and representation it brought to Asian American performers within a major studio production. Ma has continued to work prolifically across both mainstream studio productions and independent cinema, often using his platform to advocate for greater representation and more nuanced storytelling opportunities for Asian and Asian American performers within Hollywood, and has spoken openly in interviews about the importance of taking on roles that avoid reducing his characters to one-dimensional stereotypes. The supporting ensemble. Beyond its central cast, Akeelah Anderson was filled out by a talented group of supporting performers who brought Akeelah's community, family, and fellow competitors to life. J.R. Villarreal took on the role of Javier Mendez, one of Akeelah's closest friends and rivals throughout the competition circuit, delivering a warm, grounded performance that helped anchor some of the film's most touching moments of camaraderie between young competitors. And his easy chemistry with Keke Palmer gave the friendship between their two characters a natural, unforced quality that resonated with younger audiences in particular. Shawn Michael Affable, Sahara Gary, Lee Thompson Young, Jalito McCullum, Erica Hubbard, and Eddie Steeples rounded out the ensemble of classmates, family members, and community figures who populate Akeelah's world, each contributing small but meaningful pieces to the larger tapestry of the story, reflecting the film's deep commitment to portraying its South Los Angeles setting with warmth, authenticity, and a genuine sense of community. Lee Thompson Young, in particular, would go on to build a promising career of his own in the years following the film, taking on a starring role in the Disney Channel series The Famous Jet Jackson before his career was tragically cut short. Erica Hubbard continued to work steadily across film and television in the years following Akeelah and the Bee, becoming a familiar face in a number of family-oriented films and television dramas, while Eddie Steeples went on to gain wider recognition for his work in the television comedy My Name is Earl, a role that showcased a very different, more overtly comedic side of his range than the one audiences saw in Akeelah and the Bee. Dahlia Phillips appeared as Ms. Cross, one of the competition officials Akeelah encounters throughout her journey, while the wider ensemble of young actors playing fellow Spelling Bee competitors helped bring the high-stakes atmosphere of the national competition vividly to life, each one contributing a distinct personality to the crowded, nervous energy of the competition hall that gave the film's later scenes their palpable sense of tension. Many of these young performers were relatively new to film at the time, cast in part for their genuine, unpolished energy, which director Doug Acheson felt would lend the competition scenes an authenticity that more seasoned child actors might not have been able to replicate as convincingly. Together, this ensemble of performers, ranging from seasoned veterans like Fishburne and Bassett to a rising young star in Keke Palmer and a collection of dedicated supporting actors, gave Akeelah and the Bee the emotional richness and authenticity that turned it from a simple underdog story into a genuinely moving cinematic experience. Each actor brought their own unique journey and body of experience to the project, and together they created something that has continued to resonate with audiences for nearly 2 decades since the film's original release, a testament to the enduring power of a well-cast ensemble working in service of a story worth telling. That brings us to the end of our deep dive into the cast of Akeelah and the Bee, a group of performers whose individual journeys through the entertainment industry are every bit as compelling as the story they helped bring to life on screen. Akeelah and the Bee, 2006. The money behind the words and the laughter behind the camera. Before Akeelah and the Bee ever became the tear-jerking, Spelling Bee underdog classic that families still put on for movie night 20 years later, it was a script sitting in a drawer, unwanted, unfunded, and quietly rejected by nearly every studio in Hollywood. The story of how this small, tender film about an 11-year-old girl from South Los Angeles made it to the screen is, in many ways, just as compelling as the film itself. It is a story about a filmmaker who refused to compromise his vision even when it cost him money and time, about a starry cast who worked for a fraction of what they normally commanded, about a marketing campaign more expensive than the entire movie, and about a film set that, despite dealing with heavy themes of poverty, grief, and self-worth, was also full of laughter, mischief, and a few genuinely chaotic moments involving one very giggly 11-year-old star. Today we are diving deep into the financial journey of Akeelah and the Bee, breaking down exactly where the money went, how a film with a budget smaller than a single visual effects shot in a modern blockbuster managed to look and feel so rich, and then pulling back the curtain on the set itself, where real relationships, real friendships, and real comedic disasters were unfolding between takes. A decade in the making before a single dollar was spent. To understand the budget of Akeelah and the Bee, you first have to understand just how long it took to get any budget at all. Writer and director Doug Acheson did not stumble into this story overnight. The idea had been sitting with him for roughly a decade before cameras ever rolled. It began in 1994, when Acheson watched the script's National Spelling Bee and noticed something that stuck with him. Nearly every competitor came from a comfortable, well-resourced background. Private tutors, established support systems, families who had the time and money to nurture that kind of academic gift. Acheson started wondering what it would look like if a child with that same extraordinary talent came from a neighborhood where survival, not vocabulary lists, was the daily priority. He has since described his approach to the story almost like a boxing movie, structurally similar to something like Rocky, except instead of throwing punches in a ring, the heroine was throwing syllables on a stage. That framing turned out to be one of the smartest instincts in the entire project, because it gave a fairly quiet, dialogue-heavy premise the tension and stakes of a sports film, something audiences instinctively know how to root for. Acheson wrote an initial treatment in 1999 and then developed a full screenplay. In 2000, that screenplay won him a Nicholl Fellowship in Screenwriting, one of the most prestigious and competitive script prizes in the industry, awarded by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to just a handful of writers out of thousands of submissions. That fellowship is the kind of credential that can genuinely change a career overnight, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do here. It caught the attention of producers Sid Ganis and Nancy Holt Ganis, both major players with real industry weight, and they came on board to help push the project forward. But here is the part that a lot of casual fans do not know. Even with an award-winning script and experienced producers attached, the film still could not find financing. Hollywood, as an industry, is notoriously risk-averse, and a quiet drama about a black girl from a struggling neighborhood competing in a spelling bee, with no franchise value, no built-in fan base, and no obvious blockbuster hook, was simply not what studios were racing to write checks for in the early 2000s. The turning point came from an unexpected place, a documentary. In 2002, a small documentary called Spellbound, which followed real kids competing in the actual National Spelling Bee, became a surprise critical and commercial success, even earning an Academy Award nomination. Suddenly, spelling bees were culturally interesting. People realized there was genuine drama, tension, and entertainment value in watching kids sweat over the letters and words like Logaria. That shift in perception gave Acheson's project new life. Investors and studios who had passed on the script before were suddenly willing to take a second look, because the marketplace had just proven, in real time, that audiences would show up for spelling bee stories. It is a fascinating example of how timing and cultural context can resurrect a project that had already been left for dead, and it is worth remembering the next time you hear that a great script simply cannot find funding. Sometimes the problem is not the writing. Sometimes it is the world just not being ready yet. The actual numbers: a film made for less than a marketing budget for a superhero trailer. When Akeelah and the Bee finally went into production in 2004 and filmed the following year, it did so on a genuinely modest budget. Most reliable estimates put the production budget somewhere between $6 million and $8 million, with $8 million being the figure most commonly cited by industry trackers. To put that in perspective, that is roughly what a single major studio film spends on catering and outside vendors for 1 week of shooting on a giant tentpole production. It is an astonishingly small number for a film that features 2 Oscar-nominated lead actors, a rising child star, dozens of speaking roles, multiple filming locations, and a climactic competition sequence built to feel like the emotional equivalent of a championship game. So how does a movie stretch $8 million, or possibly even less, into something that looks and feels far more expensive on screen? Part of the answer lies in where the money was spent and where it deliberately was not. Akeelah and the Bee did not need elaborate visual effects, expensive stunt work, exotic international locations, or massive practical sets. Instead, it filmed largely in and around South Los Angeles, using real neighborhoods, real schools, and real community spaces to build its world, which is both a budget-conscious choice and a storytelling choice. Filming on location in an actual community grounds the film in an authenticity that a soundstage simply cannot replicate, and it happens to be significantly cheaper than constructing elaborate sets from scratch. One of the primary filming locations was in the Berkeley area of California, standing in for parts of the story, and the production also shot extensively in South Los Angeles itself, the neighborhood the story is actually about. Using existing locations, dressing them appropriately, and working with local permits is a classic low-budget filmmaking strategy, and it paid off here because the film's sense of place is one of its most praised qualities. Critics repeatedly pointed out how lived-in and specific the world felt, and that specificity came largely from shooting in real streets rather than manufactured ones. Another major budget factor was the cast itself. Lawrence Fishburne and Angela Bassett were both established, respected, Oscar-caliber actors by 2005. Fishburne had already been Morpheus in the Matrix trilogy, one of the most recognizable roles in modern cinema, and Bassett had an Academy Award nomination for What's Love Got to Do with It. Actors at that level, on a normal studio picture, command salaries that can eat up a significant chunk of an $8 million budget by themselves. The fact that they appear in this film at all, on a budget this size, tells you something important about why they signed on. This was not a paycheck project. Fishburne, who also served as one of the producers, has spoken about being genuinely moved by the material, and that emotional investment is almost certainly why he and Bassett were willing to work for compensation far below their typical studio rate. Independent and passion project films frequently rely on this dynamic, where recognizable stars accept reduced fees, sometimes close to union minimums plus a small back-end profit participation, specifically because they believe in the story being told. Without that goodwill, a movie like this simply does not get made on this budget, full stop. Then there is Keke Palmer herself, cast in the title role at just 11 or 12 years old. Child actors, especially those without a long existing track record, are typically paid significantly less than established adult stars, particularly on an independent production. Palmer was, at the time, a relative newcomer, which meant her salary would have represented a much smaller line item in the budget compared to what a bigger name would have commanded, even though her performance ended up being the emotional engine of the entire film. This is actually one of the most common and effective budget strategies in independent filmmaking. Pair one or two recognizable, bankable adult names with a talented but less expensive young or unknown lead, and let the story do the heavy lifting rather than star wattage across the board. The supporting cast, including Curtis Armstrong as the principal, Sima Villarreal, and a group of young actors playing Akeelah's fellow spelling bee competitors, would similarly have been budgeted at more modest independent film rates rather than major studio scale. Several of the young competitors cast in the film were newcomers as well, and in at least one notable case, the production leaned into authenticity by bringing in someone with real spelling bee experience. A young actor named George Hornito, who played one of the competitors, had actually been a national spelling bee finalist in real life, and he ended up serving as an unofficial consultant on set to help make the competition scenes feel accurate. That kind of resourceful, budget-conscious casting, where you find someone who already has the exact expertise you need rather than paying separately for a consultant, is a small but clever example of stretching limited resources creatively. Where the money really went, marketing versus production. Here is the detail that tends to genuinely surprise people once they hear it. While the production budget for Akeelah and the Bee sat somewhere around $6 to $8 million, Lionsgate, the studio distributing the film, reportedly spent somewhere in the range of $20 to $25 million marketing it. That means the marketing budget was roughly 3 times larger than the cost of making the entire movie. This is not typical, especially not for a small character-driven drama without action sequences or franchise recognition. It signals just how much confidence Lionsgate had that this film could break out and become a genuine crossover hit, reaching not just typical art house audiences but families, churches, schools, and community groups across the country. That marketing spend manifested in some genuinely unusual and inventive ways. Perhaps the most memorable was the partnership between Lionsgate and Starbucks, through a division called Starbucks Entertainment. This was a fairly novel concept at the time, a major coffee chain actively promoting a film through its retail locations. Akeelah and the Bee was pushed through roughly 8,300 Starbucks locations across the United States and Canada, using coffee sleeves printed with movie-related trivia, in-store signage, and promotional games designed to get customers talking about the film before it even opened. It sounds almost quaint now in an era dominated by social media marketing, but at the time, this kind of retail tie-in was a genuinely creative way to reach an audience that might not have seen a traditional trailer or billboard. The partnership continued even after the theatrical release. When the film arrived on DVD on August 29, 2006, it reportedly became the first film ever sold directly inside Starbucks stores, another small but notable piece of marketing history tied to this particular movie. Beyond the Starbucks partnership, the film also had an unusually elaborate rollout for something with such a modest production budget. It premiered at Showist, an important industry trade event, in March of 2006, and also opened the Cleveland International Film Festival that same month. Before its wide theatrical release on April 28, 2006, the studio arranged sneak preview screenings in roughly 900 theaters nationwide, building word of mouth and buzz well ahead of the official opening weekend. All of this, the trade show premiere, the festival opening slot, the massive sneak preview rollout, and the retail partnership with one of the most recognizable brands in the world, cost real money, and it is a big part of why the marketing budget dwarfed the production budget so dramatically. Despite all of that investment, the film's box office performance, while respectable for an independent drama, did not come close to recouping the full combined cost of production and marketing in its theatrical run. Akeelah and the Bee opened at around $6 million in its first weekend, landing in roughly 8th place at the box office, a solid but unspectacular result for a wide release. Over its full run, the film grossed a little under $19 million worldwide. When you set that number against a production budget of roughly $8 million, the film technically made back its production cost and then some. But when you factor in the $20 to $25 million spent on marketing, the film's theatrical performance alone did not turn a profit for the studio in the traditional box office sense. This is actually a fairly common outcome for smaller, message-driven dramas that studios back because they believe in cultural or awards value, not because the math promises a blockbuster return. The real financial life of a film like this often continues well beyond its opening weekend, through DVD sales, educational licensing, cable rights, and the kind of long cultural tale that Akeelah and the Bee absolutely developed, becoming a staple in classrooms and a frequently revisited favorite among Black families and audiences long after its theatrical run ended. Turning down bigger names for authenticity. One of the more revealing budget and creative decisions involved the casting of Dr. Larrabee, the retired professor who becomes Akeelah's mentor and coach. Before Lawrence Fishburne was cast, the filmmakers reportedly considered the legendary Sidney Poitier for the role. Poitier, of course, is one of the most iconic actors in American film history, and casting him would have brought enormous prestige and star power to the project. Ultimately, the filmmakers decided they wanted someone younger for the role, and Fishburne was cast instead. But there is a deeper layer to the casting of this character that goes beyond simple availability or age. Doug Acheson has talked about facing real pressure from studio executives who wanted to change the mentor character into a white actor, presumably believing that would make the film more commercially palatable to broader audiences. Acheson refused. He insisted that it mattered enormously for Akeelah's mentor to be someone who physically and culturally resembled her, someone from her own community rather than an outsider positioned as a savior. That decision was not just an artistic stand, it was also, indirectly, a financial one, because holding firm on casting choices against studio pressure on a project this financially fragile took real conviction. A filmmaker with less resolve, working this deep into a decade-long uphill battle just to get funding at all, might have caved to secure the money faster. Atchison did not, and the film is widely regarded as stronger and more culturally resonant because of it. Keke Palmer's own casting story adds another layer to this. She has spoken about auditioning for the role of Akeelah 5 separate times before finally landing the part. It was reportedly not until her 5th audition, when she brought a genuinely raw, emotional crying performance to the material, that Atchison felt fully convinced she was the one. Think about that for a moment. 5 auditions for an 11-year-old girl, persisting through rejection after rejection on a role that would go on to launch her entire career. That kind of persistence, on both the actor's side and the filmmaker's side in terms of holding out for exactly the right fit rather than settling early to save time and money, speaks to how much care went into a production that, on paper, had every incentive to cut corners wherever possible. Life on a low-budget set, doing more with less. Working on a budget in the range of $6 to $8 million shapes almost every practical decision on a film set, even ones audiences never consciously notice. Shooting schedules on films like this tend to be tight, because every additional day of production adds significant cost in crew wages, location fees, equipment rentals, and catering. Independent productions of this scale typically shoot on schedules measured in a handful of weeks rather than the multi-month shoots common on larger studio films. That kind of compressed schedule demands enormous efficiency from everyone involved, from the director blocking scenes quickly to actors coming in fully prepared, because there is simply no room in the budget for extensive reshoots or wasted days. This economic reality also explains some of the storytelling choices in the film itself. The National Spelling Bee finale, which needed to feel massive, tense, and championship caliber, was achieved primarily through smart staging, editing, sound design, and strong performances rather than expensive production value. A packed auditorium, some well-placed cameras, and a tightly written sequence of increasingly difficult words can generate enormous dramatic tension without needing a single dollar of visual effects. This is a masterclass in low-budget filmmaking philosophy. When you cannot buy scale, you manufacture tension through performance and editing instead. The result is a climax that plays every bit as nail-biting as a sports movie championship game, even though, structurally, it is just a room full of people standing at microphones spelling words. The film's cinematography, handled by M. David Mullen, also reflects budget-conscious but thoughtful choices. Rather than relying on elaborate camera rigs or extensive coverage, the visual style leans into intimacy, close, character-focused framing that keeps the emotional stakes personal rather than spectacular. This approach works beautifully for the material and also happens to be considerably cheaper to execute than sweeping, technically ambitious cinematography would have been. The set behind the scenes, a legendary corpsing story. Now for the part of this story that longtime fans of Keke Palmer will already be nodding along to, because she has told it publicly, and it remains one of the funniest and most human behind-the-scenes anecdotes to come out of this entire production. During her stint hosting Saturday Night Live years later, Palmer told a story about her time filming Akeelah and the Bee that painted a wonderfully chaotic picture of what it was actually like being an 11 or 12-year-old on set with heavyweight actors like Lawrence Fishburne. According to Palmer, she had a habit during filming of what actors call corpsing, which is when you break character and start laughing, usually at the worst possible moment, often triggered by something small and silly that suddenly strikes you as hilarious in the middle of an otherwise serious, emotionally heavy scene. If you have ever tried to keep a straight face during a solemn moment, whether at a funeral, in a meeting, or in church, and felt that dangerous bubble of laughter rising up at the exact wrong time, you already understand the phenomenon perfectly. Now imagine being a preteen kid, working alongside a genuine screen legend who was famous for playing Morpheus, someone whose entire on-screen persona is built around calm, intense gravity, and having that same uncontrollable urge to giggle hit you right in the middle of your scenes together. By Palmer's own account, this happened often enough, and persistently enough, that it eventually got under Fishburne's skin. He was, according to her retelling, a serious, disciplined actor who took the work and the material deeply seriously, understandably so, given the emotional weight of the film and his own role as a producer with real stake in getting the tone right. Palmer's repeated breaking of character reportedly frustrated him to the point where he actually yelled at her on set. Now, picture the scene. You have a decorated, imposing adult actor, someone the entire film industry treats with enormous respect, raising his voice at an 11-year-old girl because she keeps cracking up during takes. It is exactly the kind of moment that, when an adult retells it years later with the benefit of hindsight and comedic timing, becomes an absolutely fantastic story, and Palmer clearly knows how to tell it, delivering it with her signature energetic, impression-filled storytelling style that made the anecdote a viral moment when she shared it. But the story does not end with Fishburne yelling at a child actor and everyone simply moving on. According to Palmer, her own mother, who would have been present on set as is standard practice for productions involving minors, was not about to let that slide without a response. Palmer has described her mother turning around and essentially giving Fishburne a piece of her mind right back, standing up for her daughter in front of everyone on set. There's something wonderfully full circle and human about that exchange. A legendary actor loses his patience with a giggly kid, and then gets immediately checked by that kid's very protective mother, all in the middle of a working film set trying to capture emotionally delicate scenes about grief, poverty, and self-belief. It is the kind of behind-the-scenes moment that never makes it into a trailer or a making-of featurette at the time, but decades later becomes exactly the sort of story fans love, because it humanizes everyone involved. Fishburne is not just an intimidating on-screen icon, he is a working actor who occasionally lost his patience under the pressure of trying to nail difficult scenes on a tight schedule and budget. Palmer is not just a poised, talented performer, she is also, quite understandably, a normal kid who sometimes could not stop giggling. And her mother is exactly the kind of protective parent you would hope every child actor has standing behind them on set. Palmer has also spoken more broadly and warmly about her initial nervousness meeting Fishburne, admitting that before actually working with him, she was genuinely intimidated because of his role in the Matrix films. She has described thinking, essentially, that she was about to meet Morpheus himself, only to find, once actual filming began, that he turned out to be kind, that the two of them joked around together, and that they had fun on set despite the seriousness of the material and despite, apparently, occasionally testing each other's patience. That contrast, between her initial nervousness and the eventual warmth and playfulness that developed, is a detail worth sitting with, because it reflects something true about a lot of film sets, especially ones working on a tight independent budget where cast and crew end up spending long, intense days together in close quarters. Under that kind of pressure, real relationships form quickly, whether that means genuine friendship, occasional friction, or, in this case, apparently both. Small budget, big heart on set. Beyond the specific corpsing incident, there is a broader picture that emerges when you piece together how cast members have talked about this shoot over the years. Angela Bassett has spoken about how personally connected she felt to her role as Akeelah's mother, drawing directly from her own experience being raised by a hardworking single mother. That kind of personal resonance tends to shape the atmosphere of a set in meaningful ways, because when actors are emotionally invested rather than simply clocking in for a paycheck, it changes the energy of every single day of filming, for better and occasionally for more emotionally intense moments, as well. Fishburne, too, has described the project as a genuine labor of love, emphasizing repeatedly that this was fundamentally a family film built around a story deeper than its surface premise about spelling. It is worth remembering just how unusual the cast dynamic was for a film this size. You had two adult lead actors who were already Academy Award nominated, working alongside a young cast that included several newcomers, on a shoot with a schedule and budget that left very little room for excess. That combination tends to create sets that are simultaneously more relaxed in some ways, because there is less of the enormous corporate machinery and layers of executive oversight that surround a massive studio production, and more pressure-filled in other ways, because everyone knows there is no financial cushion if things go wrong. Independent film sets like this often end up feeling more like a tight-knit, almost family-run operation, precisely because everyone, from the director to the producers to the actors, is working with a shared sense that they are all pulling in the same direction to get something meaningful made with genuinely limited resources. That family-style atmosphere likely also explains why a moment like the Fishburne and Palmer corpsing incident could happen and resolve itself the way it did, with a flash of frustration followed quickly by a mother stepping in, and everyone essentially moving forward together. On a massive studio blockbuster, with dozens of executives, handlers, and layers of professional distance separating everyone, that kind of raw, unfiltered moment between a veteran actor, a child star, and a protective parent might never have happened in quite the same candid way, or might have been carefully managed and smoothed over by publicists before word ever got out. On a small independent film shot largely on location in real neighborhoods, working with a modest crew and an even more modest budget, these more human, unpolished moments had space to actually occur, and decades later, thanks to Palmer's own willingness to share the story publicly and hilariously, fans get to hear about them in vivid, colorful detail. The legacy that followed the modest budget. It is genuinely remarkable, when you step back and look at the full picture, how much cultural and emotional impact Akeelah and the Bee has had relative to its financial footprint. This was a film made for somewhere between $6 and $8 million, a number that barely registers as a rounding error against many modern studio productions, and yet it went on to earn an exceptionally rare A+ audience score from CinemaScore, a rating reserved for films that connect with viewers on a truly exceptional emotional level. It received 11 award wins and 26 nominations across various ceremonies, with Keke Palmer specifically winning an NAACP Image Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Motion Picture for her performance, an extraordinary achievement for someone so young in only her breakout leading role. The film's afterlife has arguably mattered even more than its initial theatrical run. It became, and remains, a frequently assigned or shown film in classrooms across the country, used specifically because of its honest, non-stereotypical portrayal of a Black community grappling with real issues around public education, poverty, self-esteem, and the tension between individual achievement and collective support. That kind of enduring educational and cultural relevance is not something that can be bought with a marketing budget, no matter how large. It comes from a story that was clearly crafted with a decade of genuine thought, care, and personal conviction behind it, brought to life by a cast that, by every account, believed deeply in what they were making, corpsing fits and all. When you consider everything together, the 10 years Doug Atchison spent developing the idea before a single scene was filmed, the years of failed funding attempts before an unrelated documentary about real spelling bees happened to shift the cultural winds in his favor, the decision to hold firm on casting a mentor character who authentically reflected Akeelah's own community rather than caving to studio pressure. The $8 million production budget dwarfed nearly 3 times over by a marketing campaign built around coffee shop trivia cards, and a film set where a Hollywood legend occasionally lost his patience with a giggling preteen only to get gently put in his place by her mother, you start to understand why this film continues to resonate so strongly with audiences so many years after its release. It was never really about how much money was spent making it. It was about how much genuine belief, persistence, and heart went into every single decision along the way, both in front of the camera and behind it. Breaking down the numbers one more time. It helps to actually sit with the raw figures for a moment, because numbers like these rarely get put side by side in a way that shows just how lopsided the economics of this film really were. On the production side, most tracking sources land somewhere between $6 million and $8 million as the total cost of actually making the movie, meaning everything from paying the cast and crew to renting locations, covering equipment, feeding everyone on set, building whatever minimal sets were required, and handling post-production work like editing, scoring, and sound mixing. Composer Aaron Zigman was brought on to score the film, and a film score, especially one meant to carry as much emotional weight as this one does across its climactic B-sequences, is itself a meaningful budget line even on a modest independent production. Editing was handled by Glenn Farr, whose job was essentially to take footage shot efficiently and quickly, on a schedule that could not afford extensive reshoots, and shape it into something that felt seamless and emotionally propulsive. On the distribution side, once Lionsgate picked the film up, the studio poured somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million into getting audiences into theater seats. That is not an unusual amount of money for marketing a wide theatrical release in general, but it is a genuinely unusual ratio when set against a production budget this small. Most films with marketing budgets in that range are backed by production budgets many times larger, not smaller. That imbalance tells you everything about how confident Lionsgate was in the film's crossover